Right now, some of Canada's biggest banks are approving mortgages on condos based on prices that no longer exist. The unit is worth $640,000 today. The bank is writing the mortgage as if it's worth $800,000, and the buyer walks in on day one already underwater. It's called a blanket appraisal. Canada's banking regulator has already warned the banks about this. And what's happening right now in Toronto's pre-construction condo market is something that a lot of people are not paying attention to. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly what blanket appraisals are and why banks have a financial incentive to keep doing them, and what it means for thousands of condo buyers who are closing on units this year and next. Let's get into it. Here's what's happening in Toronto right now. In 2025, over 29,000 condo units were completed across the GTA. That's 50% above the 10-year average. A record number of buildings reaching the finish line and handing over keys. Another 22,000 units are projected to complete in 2026. That means roughly 51,000 condo units closing in a 2-year window. And every one of those closing requires a mortgage. Every mortgage requires an appraisal, and that's where this story starts. Here's how this works. When you buy a resale condo, the bank sends an appraiser to assess the current market value. Your mortgage is based on that number. If the value came in below what you agreed to pay, you either bring more cash or the deal falls apart. With pre-construction condo, the process is a little different. You signed a contract years ago. Now the building is done and you need a mortgage to close. In a normal market, the bank would appraise the unit at today's market value. But today's market value is significantly lower than what many buyers agreed to pay back in 2021 and 2022. So instead of appraising each unit individually, some lenders are applying what's called a blanket appraisal. One valuation applied across the whole building, often at or near the original purchase price, not the price the unit is worth today. The result? Buyers get approved for mortgages based on values that don't reflect reality. And this is the part most people don't connect. The same banks writing these mortgages are often the same banks that provide the construction financing to the developer. When a developer builds a 400-unit condo tower, they borrow hundreds of millions to fund that construction. The banks that lend that money needs the developer to collect on every closing. If 30, 40, or 50 buyers can't close because the appraisals came in too low, the developer doesn't get paid. And the bank's construction loan is at risk. Blanket appraisals solve that problem. The bank values a unit at the original price. The buyer qualifies, the deal closes, the developer pays back the construction loan, and the bank's balance sheet stays clean. The risk doesn't disappear, it transfers. It moves from the developer and the bank construction loan onto the buyer's mortgage. The buyer is now carrying a loan that's larger than what their condo is actually worth. Let me give you a real example of what this looks like. The Globe and Mail reported on a buyer who agreed to pay $2.195 million for a condo in Leaside. They put down $439,000 deposit. When it came time to close, the appraisal came in at $1.6 million. That's 27% below the purchase price. Under a normal appraisal, the buyer would need to come up with hundreds of thousands additional cash to close, or they walk away and lose their deposit. Under a blanket appraisal, the bank writes the mortgage as if the unit is worth what the buyer originally paid for. The deal closes, buyer moves in, but they owe far more than the unit is worth. Let me show you the numbers across the entire market. Pre-construction condos in downtown Toronto peaked at roughly $1,700 per square foot in mid-2022. That's what buyers signed contracts at. As of Q4 of 2024, new construction units are selling at $1,300 per square foot. That's a 21% decline from the peak. But the gap is even wider than that. Urbanation data shows that among condos completed and resold in the past year, the average resale price was about $903 per square foot. That's the actual market value, not what was paid, what the unit trades for today. The average gap between what pre-construction buyers paid and what their unit is worth on the open market is roughly 24%. On a $600,000 unit, that's $144,000 in negative equity on day one. If this is the kind of thing you want to understand before it shows up in the headlines, hit subscribe. I cover Toronto real estate every week with actual data. So let's get back to it. Canada's banking regulator knows about this. OFSI, the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, posted a formal notice about bank appraisals back in 2025. In October, they held a private meeting with the chief risk officers of Canada's biggest banks and delivered a warning. Their language was specific. They said that blanket appraisals could result in uninsured mortgage loans exceeding 80% of the market value at the time the mortgage is issued. That would be a potential breach of the Bank Act. After that warning, at least one major bank changed their marketing language on pre-construction mortgage website. Before the warning, it said, once approved, you stay approved until your closing date. After the warning, they revised it. But the practice itself has not stopped. OSFI has not announced enforcement actions. The appraisals are still being applied. Units are still closing with loans based on values from 3 years ago. Here's the part that almost nobody's talking about. A blanket appraisal gets you through closing. It does not get you through renewal. Many of these buyers are on a 5-year fixed term. When the term ends in 2029 or 2030 and they go to renew, the bank will order a new appraisal, a real one, based on what the unit is worth at that point. If the condo market has not recovered to 2022 levels by then, and there's no indication that it will, these buyers will owe more than what their home is worth at renewal. That is the definition of being underwater. At renewal, the lender will require additional funds to bring the loan within acceptable limits, or they could decline to renew entirely, forcing the buyer to find alternative financing or sell. The bank appraisal did not fix that problem. It delayed it for 5 years. Let me show you who owns these units. Stats Canada data from 2022 shows that 57% of condos built between 2016 and 2021 in the Toronto area are investor owned. In the pre-construction market, investors make up roughly 70% of the buyers. These are people closing units right now. Most of them bought with a plan to rent the unit and cover the costs. But the math has changed. Toronto rents has been falling. One-bedroom rents dropped $165 year over year to just under $2,000 a month as of February 2026. Two bedrooms are down nearly 4% from 2023's peak. Vacancy rates are at 4.2%. In the new luxury condo segment, vacancies are above 6%. Landlords are now offering 1 or 2 months free rent just to fill the units. At the same time, carrying costs on these condos have never been higher. Mortgage payments plus maintenance fees plus property tax on a $600,000 unit at current rates often exceed $3,500 a month. If the unit rents for $2,000, the investor is bleeding $1,500 a month out of pocket. An investor who bought pre-construction in 2022 closed in 2026 with a blanket appraisal and is now losing $1,500 a month on rent is not going to hold that unit for 5 years to see if the market recovers. They're going to sell. And that adds more supply to a market that already has too much. CMHC data confirms that the stress is already showing up. Toronto's mortgage delinquency rate surged to 0.24% in Q2 of 2025. That's a 60% increase year over year and the highest level since 2012. Ontario's overall delinquency rate is now above the national average for the first time in over a decade. These numbers don't isolate condos from houses, but given that condos represent the most overbuilt, most investor heavy, and most negatively cash flow segment of the market, it is reasonable to conclude that a large share of these delinquencies are condo related. Blanket appraisals are not a footnote. They are allowing thousands of transactions to close at values that do not reflect reality. That masks the true condition of the condo market. When the market report condos prices based on these closings, the numbers look more stable than they actually are. Prices appear to be holding. In reality, the underlying value has already dropped 20 to 30%. This creates a false floor. And when the floor gets tested at renewal, or even when investors give up and sell, the real price level becomes visible. For anyone watching the Toronto condo market and thinking it looks like it's stabilizing, the blanket appraisal story is a reason to question that assumption. Over 50,000 condo units are closing in a 2-year window. Many of those buyers are getting mortgages based on values that are 20 to 30% above what their unit is worth today. Canada's banking regulator has warned the banks. The banks have not stopped. The risk is not happening 5 years from now. The risk is being created right now, one closing at a time. Thanks again for watching. See you soon.